My father skipped my wedding to fund my brother's doomed business, fracturing our relationship. Now that my hotel chain is worth millions, they suddenly want a family dinner. I showed up, but I brought a trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I remember the exact, biting chill of the crystal champagne flute against my trembling palm. It was the morning of my wedding, a day I had spent 2 agonizingly long, meticulously planned years preparing for. The bridal suite smelled faintly of expensive hairspray, blooming white lilies, and the nervous, electric energy that precedes a life-altering vow. I was 24 years old, staring at my reflection in a floor-to-ceiling gilded mirror, trying to memorize the way the intricate lace of my gown draped over my shoulders. My best friend Alice, who was 32 and already functioning with the sharp, ruthless efficiency of the executive assistant she would one day become for me, was busy adjusting the heavy veil pinned into my hair. Everything was perfect. The string quartet had arrived. The caterers were setting up downstairs. And then, my phone buzzed on the mahogany vanity. I glanced down, expecting a sweet, panicked text from my groom or perhaps a message from the wedding planner. Instead, the screen simply read, "Nathan, my father." A fond, exasperated smile touched my lips. I assumed he was lost in the hotel corridors, or perhaps struggling to figure out how to pin the delicate white boutonniere to the lapel of his rented tuxedo. I picked up the phone and slid my thumb across the screen, my heart fluttering with the bright, naive hope of a daughter waiting to be given away. "Dad, where are you?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the vast, brightly lit suite. "Alice is just finishing up my hair, and the photographer wants to do the first look pictures in the courtyard in about 20 minutes. The silence on the other end of the line was not the comfortable, absent-minded silence of an older man fumbling with his collar. It was a heavy, suffocating, leaden quiet, the kind of silence that precedes a devastating blow. I felt a sudden, inexplicable drop in my stomach, a coldness that seeped through the heavy silk of my dress and settled deep in my bones. "Abigail," he finally spoke. His voice was completely devoid of the warmth, the pride, or the emotional resonance a father should naturally possess on the morning of his only daughter's wedding. It was flat, utilitarian, rushed. "I'm not coming to the venue." The champagne flute slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, violent crash, shattering into a dozen glittering pieces. Alice gasped, instantly dropping the veil and stepping back, her eyes wide as she looked from the broken glass to the sudden, pale horror washing over my face. "What do you mean you're not coming?" I whispered, my voice barely pushing past the sudden, painful lump in my throat. "Dad, the ceremony starts in less than 2 hours. Are you sick? Did the car break down? I can send Weston to come get you." "No, Abigail, don't send anyone," Nathan interrupted, his tone laced with a sharp edge of irritation, as if my wedding was merely a tedious inconvenience in his day. "I'm at the bank downtown. I had to meet with the loan officer before they closed for the weekend." The bank? My mind struggled to process the absurdity of the word. "Dad, why are you at the bank right now?" "You are supposed to be here, walking me down the aisle." "It's Ethan," he said, and the moment that name left his lips, a familiar, sickening wave of exhaustion washed over me. Ethan, my older brother, the golden child. His investors suddenly pulled out of his new e-commerce venture this morning. If he doesn't secure a massive injection of capital by noon, the suppliers are going to void his contracts, and he'll lose the warehouse lease. I had to withdraw my retirement funds and take out a second mortgage on the house to cover his margin. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The girl looking back at me looked like a ghost draped in white tulle. "You are missing my wedding, my actual wedding day. Because Ethan's latest get-rich-quick scheme is falling apart." "It's not a scheme, Abigail. It's a proprietary logistics matrix, and it's highly sensitive." Nathan snapped, his voice rising in fervent defense of his son, as it always did. "He is your brother, and he is in desperate trouble. He needs me. Your wedding is just a party. You'll still be married at the end of the day. Ethan's entire livelihood is on the line. You need to stop being so selfish and understand the pressure this family is under." Before I could even formulate a response, before I could scream or cry or beg him to choose me, just this once, the line went dead. He hung up. I lowered the phone slowly, the dial tone ringing in my ears like a siren. Alice rushed forward, gently taking my shaking hands, her eyes brimming with sympathetic tears as she asked what happened. But I couldn't speak. The betrayal of his absence was a sharper agony than a knife to the chest. The rest of that day was a surreal, hollow nightmare. I walked down the aisle alone, the heavy silence of the church echoing loudly in my ears despite the beautiful music. Every sympathetic glance from the guests, every pitying tilt of a head, felt like a physical burn on my skin. I smiled until my jaw ached, I danced the first dance, I cut the cake, but I was entirely hollowed out inside. The man who was supposed to be my anchor, the man whose approval I had spent my entire life desperately trying to earn, had looked at my most important milestone and decided it was entirely expendable in the face of my brother's latest failure. The immediate aftermath was even worse. 3 days later, while I was supposed to be packing for a brief, delayed honeymoon, an obsessive, gnawing need for closure drove me to my father's house. I needed to see him face to face. I needed to hear an apology. I needed him to acknowledge the profound, echoing crater he had blasted into our relationship. I let myself in through the side door, the familiar scent of old wood and Nathan's pipe, tobacco making my stomach churn with a sudden, violent wave of anxiety. As I walked into the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. Ethan was lounging on the worn floral sofa. He was 38 now, but he sat there with the entitled, sprawling posture of a spoiled teenager. He was casually wearing a pair of expensive, imported silk pajamas, intensely focused on a video game playing on the large television, casually tossing handfuls of gourmet popcorn into his mouth. He didn't look like a man whose business had almost collapsed. He looked completely, infuriatingly relaxed. "Oh, hey sis," Ethan mumbled around a mouthful of food, not even bothering to pause his game or look in my direction. "Heard the wedding was a nice little shindig. Sorry I couldn't make it. The logistics market is a brutal battlefield, you know? A CEO's work is never done." Before I could unleash the torrent of furious words building in my throat, Nathan walked into the room from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He looked older, his shoulders slumped under the weight of the massive, reckless debt he had just taken on, but his eyes hardened the moment he saw me standing there. "What are you doing here, Abigail?" he asked, his tone devoid of any parental warmth. "Shouldn't you be off on a beach somewhere?" "I came to see you, Dad," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "I came because I waited for you. I waited for an hour in that dress, hoping you would walk through the doors of the church." Nathan sighed heavily, a deep, exasperated sound, as if he were dealing with a petulant toddler rather than a grieving daughter. He walked over and placed a protective, comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan smirked at the television screen. "We have been over this on the phone, Abigail," Nathan said coldly, his gaze sweeping over me with blatant disappointment. Ethan was facing a catastrophic financial ruin. Do you have any idea the stress he was under? The sheer terror. I did what a father is supposed to do. I protected my son. I saved his future. I would have thought, given your comfortable new marriage, you would have the grace to be happy for your brother's survival, rather than throwing a tantrum over a missed party. I stared at the two of them. The visual of Nathan's hand resting lovingly on the shoulder of the son who bled him dry, while he looked at me with nothing but cold irritation, permanently burned itself into my retinas. In that exact moment, the desperate, yearning little girl inside of me died completely. I realized, with a chilling, absolute clarity, that I would never be enough for him. I would always be the backup plan, the afterthought, the sacrificial lamb offered up on the altar of Ethan's perpetual incompetence. I turned around and walked out of the house without saying another word. I didn't cry. The tears were completely gone, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. They thought I was weak. They thought I would simply swallow the disrespect, cry in private, and eventually return to the fold, forever accepting my place at the absolute bottom of their priority list. They thought I would just fade away into the background, a silent casualty of their toxic bond. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. What Nathan always conveniently forgot when he praised Ethan's hustle was my own history of quiet, uncelebrated sacrifices. When I was 19, Nathan suffered a massive heart attack. His small auto repair shop had been struggling, and he had quietly let his health insurance lapse to keep the lights on. The hospital bills were catastrophic. While Ethan, who was 23 at the time, decided he needed to find himself, by backpacking through Europe on a high-interest credit card, I dropped out of my sophomore year of college. I drained the modest college fund my late mother had left for me, handed every single penny over to the hospital billing department, and immediately started working 3 grueling jobs. I poured coffee at dawn, waited tables at noon, and scrubbed office floors at midnight. I kept a roof over Nathan's head, paid for his rehabilitation, and literally kept him alive. I never asked for a thank you, and I never received one. But that day, walking away from his house after my ruined wedding, I took all of that deeply ingrained work ethic, all of that suppressed anger, and all of that crushing grief, and I weaponized it. I poured every ounce of my energy into my career. Over the next 10 years, I worked with a terrifying, relentless, singular focus. I started as a junior manager at a failing independent hotel, learned every single facet of the hospitality industry from the ground up, took massive calculated risks, and eventually founded my own company. Now, at 34, I am the founder and CEO of the Vance Boutique Collection, a luxury hotel chain known for its uncompromising, ultra-realistic, and cinematic aesthetics. We focus on natural lighting, impeccable detail, and flawless service. Last Tuesday, Forbes magazine ran a massive cover story on my company's explosive growth, officially valuing the enterprise at a staggering $580 million. The silence from my family had been absolute for 10 years. But the scent of money, especially hundreds of millions of dollars of it, is a powerful pheromone to parasites. Exactly 48 hours after the magazine hit the newsstands, Ethan bypassed the security desk at my corporate headquarters by aggressively charming a new receptionist and burst into my private executive office. He wasn't alone. Abigail, little sister. Ethan boomed, throwing his arms wide as if we had spoken just yesterday. He was wearing a suit that was visibly expensive but tailored poorly, the fabric straining slightly across his midsection. He smelled overwhelmingly of an aggressive, spicy cologne designed to mask the subtle scent of desperation. Clinging tightly to his arm was Emma. Emma was 30, with sharply contoured makeup, a designer handbag that cost more than a reliable used car, and eyes that darted around my sprawling, glass-walled office like a cashier authenticating a $100 bill. She was currently scanning the custom mahogany furniture and the panoramic view of the city skyline, rapidly calculating my net worth in real time. "Ethan," I said evenly, not standing up from my desk, "to what do I owe the intrusion?" "Intrusion? That's a harsh word for family," Ethan chuckled, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. He leaned over my desk, invading my space. "Emma and I saw the article. Incredible stuff, really. Little Abigail a mogul. We wanted to come down, congratulate you in person, and, well, talk about the future. I'm currently working as a senior synergy consultant for decentralized Web3 integrations, but the market is volatile. I was thinking, with your massive new capital liquidity, we could finally partner up. I have a vision for a crypto-based loyalty program for your hotels that only requires a minor $10 million seed investment." His audacity was breathtaking. He had no skills, no actual profession, and a trail of bankruptcies behind him, yet he stood there demanding millions with a terrifying, unearned confidence. Emma leaned forward, resting her perfectly manicured hands on my desk. "And of course, we'd need an executive suite in the flagship property to use as our base of operations," Emma chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Just to ensure the brand integration is seamless, naturally." I looked at them. I saw the greed radiating from their pores. I calmly pressed a button on my intercom, summoned my head of security, and had them professionally, but firmly, escorted out of the building. Ethan shouted empty threats about family loyalty the whole way down the hallway. I thought that would be the end of it. But later that evening, as I sat in the quiet solitude of my living room, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. It was a text message. Not from Ethan, but from Nathan. The first direct communication in a decade. Family dinner at my house tomorrow at 7 p.m. Important discussion regarding Ethan's future. Do not be late. I stared at the glowing screen. They were teaming up. The golden child and his enabler, preparing to corner me and demand their share of an empire they had absolutely no part in building. I smiled, a cold, sharp, dangerous smile. I typed back a single word, okay. The single word I had typed in response to my father's commanding text message glowed brightly against the stark, darkened backdrop of my living room. Okay. It was such a small, unassuming word, yet it carried the weight of a decade of carefully suppressed fury. I set my phone down gently on the pristine glass surface of my coffee table and walked over to the expansive, floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse apartment. The city sprawled out beneath me, a glittering ocean of amber and diamond lights, a testament to the empire I had built with my own two hands while my family had written me off as collateral damage. I was no longer the 24-year-old girl weeping in a ruined wedding dress. I was Abigail Vance, a woman who controlled a vast corporate ecosystem, who negotiated with international developers, and who possessed the resources to dismantle anyone who threatened my peace. My father and my brother believed they were summoning a dutiful, wealthy benefactor to solve their problems. They had absolutely no idea that they were walking blindly into a steel trap that had been silently sitting in the shadows for 5 years. I picked up my phone again and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang only twice before a sharp, alert voice answered. "Abigail, it is past 10 o'clock, Weston said. Weston was my lead corporate attorney, a man whose brilliant, analytical mind was matched only by his absolute loyalty to my company. Is there a crisis with the upcoming resort expansion in Tokyo? No, Weston, the Tokyo project is perfectly on schedule, I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This is a personal matter. I need you to pull the complete ownership file on the residential property located at 428 Elm Street. The holding company is Vanguard Ascendant Trust. I could hear the distinct sound of Weston sitting up straighter in his leather desk chair, the rustle of paperwork in the background. 428 Elm Street. The property we quietly acquired out of bank foreclosure 5 years ago, the one currently leased to a Mr. Nathan. Oh, I see, your father. Exactly, I said, a cold, humorless smile touching my lips. 5 years ago, the inevitable had happened. The massive second mortgage my father had taken out on his home to fund Ethan's catastrophic e-commerce venture had gone into default. Ethan, predictably, had never paid back a single dime. When the bank moved to foreclose, my father was completely devastated, facing the prospect of being thrown out onto the street in his late 50s. Without saying a word to him, without seeking a shred of gratitude, I had instructed Weston to create a blind trust. I purchased the house in cash directly from the bank. Since that day, my father had been paying a remarkably subsidized, below-market rent to a faceless corporate entity, utterly oblivious to the fact that the roof over his head was owned entirely by the daughter he had abandoned. I held the deed to his entire world in my filing cabinet. I am having dinner with my father and my brother tomorrow evening, I continued, pacing slowly across the thick, imported rug of my living room. Ethan is actively circling my wealth. He brought a woman named Emma into my office today, pitching a fraudulent Web3 synergy investment. I need you and your investigative team to tear into Ethan's current financial standing. I want every bank statement, every failed LLC, every unpaid debt, and every piece of pending litigation you can legally unearth. Leave absolutely no stone unturned. Consider it done, Abigail, Weston said, his tone shifting into pure professional efficiency. I will have a complete, compiled dossier on my desk by noon tomorrow. If he is running a scam, we will find the blueprint. The next morning, I arrived at my corporate headquarters with a renewed, sharpened sense of purpose. I spent the early hours reviewing architectural blueprints for a new boutique location, but my mind was entirely focused on the impending confrontation. At precisely 12:15, Weston walked into my office, carrying a thick, heavy black binder. He set it down on my mahogany desk with a resounding thud. "It is worse than we could have possibly imagined," Weston stated, adjusting his glasses, his expression grave. "Your brother is not an entrepreneur, Abigail. He is a serial financial predator. His Synergy consulting firm is a hollow shell company registered in Delaware. He has no clients, no revenue stream, and absolutely no proprietary technology. What he does have, however, is a trail of devastated investors, mostly older individuals. He promises them high-yield returns on decentralized investments, liquidates their capital, and funnels the money into offshore accounts to maintain his lifestyle." I slowly opened the binder, my eyes scanning the meticulously organized financial records, court summons, and bank transfer receipts. And Emma. Emma is listed as the primary shareholder of 3 of those offshore accounts, Weston confirmed, pointing to a highlighted section on page 42. "She is not just a girlfriend, she is a complicit partner in the fraud. Furthermore, we discovered something highly alarming regarding your father's accounts. Ethan has been claiming to manage a small retirement portfolio for your father. Instead, he has been steadily draining it, transferring hundreds of dollars every week into a shell account that Emma uses to purchase luxury goods. Your brother is actively stealing from your father's remaining life savings." A cold, hardened knot of pure disgust formed in my stomach. The sheer scale of Ethan's malice was breathtaking. I closed the binder, the heavy thud echoing in the quiet office. "Prepare these documents, Weston. Make copies of the most damning pages. Tomorrow evening, Ethan's entire house of cards is going to burn to the ground." I didn't have to wait until the family dinner to encounter Ethan's desperate greed. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a brief, solitary lunch in the grand lobby restaurant of my flagship hotel, a space designed with towering marble pillars, cascading indoor waterfalls, and hushed, elegant lighting. I was halfway through a simple salad, reviewing emails on my tablet, when a harsh, jarring voice shattered the refined atmosphere. "Abigail, just the person I was looking for." I looked up to see Ethan striding across the pristine marble floor, completely ignoring the hostess who was frantically trying to stop him. He was wearing a different suit today, though equally ill-fitting, and his face was flushed with an unnatural, hyperactive energy. Emma trailed slightly behind him, her eyes darting nervously at the wealthy patrons who were beginning to stare at the commotion. "Ethan," I said coldly, deliberately not inviting him to sit down. "I am in the middle of my workday. We are supposed to meet at Dad's house tonight." I know, but time is of the essence in the tech world, sis," Ethan declared, pulling out a chair uninvited and dropping heavily into it. He leaned across the table, lowering his voice into what he clearly believed was a conspiratorial, persuasive whisper. "Listen, I've been crunching the numbers on the partnership we discussed yesterday. The board of my integration firm is getting antsy. They have other offers. If we don't lock down that $10 million seed investment by the end of business today, I can't guarantee you exclusive rights to the platform." He slid a hastily stapled, thoroughly unimpressive document across the table. It was titled Pre-Investment Non-Disclosure and Capital Advance Agreement. I stared at the crude, amateurish paperwork, genuinely marveling at his sheer, unadulterated arrogance. He honestly believed I was foolish enough to sign away millions of dollars based on a conversation and a printed Word document. "Let me make sure I understand you correctly, Ethan," I said, my voice dangerously calm, keeping my hands neatly folded in my lap. "You want me to wire $10 million to your firm, right now, before any formal legal review, before any due diligence, and before I have even seen a functional prototype of this so-called platform." "It's an act of good faith, Abigail," Ethan insisted, his smile tightening slightly, a flicker of panic bleeding into his eyes. "Family helps family. I'm giving you the ground floor opportunity of a lifetime. You should be thanking me. Do you have any idea how much money this is going to generate for your hotel chain?" I let a long, suffocating silence stretch between us. I looked directly into his eyes, watching the false bravado slowly begin to crack under my unwavering gaze. "I don't need your ground floor opportunity, Ethan," I said softly, reaching into my leather briefcase resting on the chair beside me, "because I already know exactly where your investments go." I pulled out a single sheet of paper, a copy from Weston's dossier, and slid it smoothly across the table, stopping it right over his ridiculous contract. It was a detailed, certified bank record. "This is a wire transfer from your supposed business account, dated 3 weeks ago," I explained, my voice carrying clearly over the gentle hum of the restaurant. "It shows a transfer of $85,000, not to a software developer, not to a logistics manager, but directly to a luxury European auto dealership to pay off the remaining balance on a customized sports car. A car registered entirely in your name." Ethan's face went completely, shockingly pale. His eyes wide, he stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake that had just materialized on the table. Emma leaned over to look, her jaw dropping slightly in genuine panic. Where did you get this?" Ethan stammered, his loud, booming voice suddenly shrinking into a weak, raspy whisper. This is private financial information. You hacked me. You're spying on me." "I don't need to hack you, Ethan. You leave a trail of financial incompetence a mile wide," I replied, my tone icy and unforgiving. "You are not an entrepreneur. You are a fraud. And if you ever burst into my hotel or my office demanding money again, I will not hesitate to hand this entire file over to the authorities. Do you understand me?" The panic in Ethan's eyes instantly mutated into a vicious, cornered rage. He slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the silverware and causing several nearby guests to gasp in alarm. "You think you're so superior?" Ethan hissed, his face turning a mottled, ugly shade of red. He stood up, leaning aggressively over me. "You think because you got lucky playing hotel maid that you can judge me? You're nothing but a bitter, jealous little girl who's still crying because Daddy didn't go to her stupid wedding. I'm the visionary of this family. I'm going to tell Dad exactly how you're treating me. He'll make you see reason." "You owe us, Abigail." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated, staring him down without blinking. "And I highly suggest you save your breath for dinner tonight. We have a lot more to discuss." Ethan snatched his fake contract off the table, his chest heaving with exaggerated, furious breaths, and stormed out of the restaurant, Emma scurrying anxiously in his wake. I calmly picked up my fork, completely unfazed by his theatrical outburst, and finished my salad. The trap was set, and the prey was actively throwing himself into the jaws. The hours leading up to the scheduled family dinner were fraught with a frantic, desperate energy radiating entirely from Ethan's direction. My phone became a relentless beacon of his escalating panic. He sent dozens of erratic text messages, oscillating wildly between aggressive threats and pathetic bargaining. "You're making a huge mistake, Abigail. If you don't fund my company, I'm going to the press. I'll tell them the CEO of Vance Boutique Collection abandons her own family in their time of need. Look, let's just make it 5 million. 5 million and a silent partnership. I won't even tell Dad we fought." I ignored every single message, letting his desperation compound in the silence. However, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone rang, and the caller ID made me pause. It was Nathan. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the emotional manipulation I knew was coming, and answered. "Hello, Dad." "Abigail," Nathan said, his voice heavy with a weary, rehearsed sadness. It was the exact tone he always used when he was about to excuse Ethan's latest disaster. "Ethan just called me. He was very upset. He said you were incredibly hostile to him at your hotel today. He said you refused to even look at his business proposal. He presented me with a fraudulent document demanding $10 million, Dad," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level, refusing to let him drag me into a defensive posture. "I simply declined the offer." Nathan sighed, the sound echoing through the phone like a physical weight. Abigail, please, you have to understand his passion. He works so hard, he just gets a little overzealous sometimes. He's a visionary, and visionaries struggle to communicate with. Well, with business-minded people like you. He's on the verge of a massive breakthrough. He just needs this one final push. I closed my eyes, a sharp ache throbbing in my temples. Dad, he is not on the verge of a breakthrough. He is bankrupting you, again. That is none of your concern. Nathan snapped, his protective instinct flaring instantly, his voice rising in anger. Ethan and I handle our own finances. Yes, things have been tight lately. I've had to take on a few extra shifts at the hardware store just to cover my rent, but it's a temporary sacrifice. Because we are family, and family supports each other. You have more money than you could ever spend in 10 lifetimes, Abigail. I expect you to come to this dinner tonight prepared to help your brother. It is your duty. He hung up before I could respond. I stood in the middle of my office, staring out at the city skyline, a profound sense of sorrow washing over me. Nathan was so deeply entrenched in his delusion, so hopelessly committed to the narrative of Ethan's eventual success, that he was willing to work himself to the bone in his 60s rather than face the truth. He genuinely believed he was paying rent to a benevolent landlord, completely unaware that his own son was simultaneously draining his meager savings behind his back. Just as I was packing my briefcase to leave for the evening, Weston entered my office one last time. His face was grim, and he held a single, manila folder in his hands. I apologize for the late interruption, Abigail, but my team just finished auditing the deeper layers of Ethan's bank activity, Weston said, stepping forward and handing me the folder. I felt you needed this specific piece of information before you walked into that house tonight. I opened the folder. Inside was a copy of a loan application from a predatory, high-interest payday lending agency. The loan was for $50,000. Look closely at the applicant information and then look at the signature line, Weston instructed quietly. I scanned the document. The applicant listed was not Ethan. It was Nathan Vance. My father's social security number, his address, and his date of birth were all meticulously filled out. But as I looked at the bottom of the page, my blood ran completely cold. The signature scrawled on the dotted line was a clumsy, obvious forgery. It was Ethan's handwriting, desperately trying to mimic our father's loops and slants. Your brother didn't just steal from your father's existing accounts, Weston explained, his voice laced with professional disgust. 3 days ago, when he realized you might not hand over the money, he took out a high-yield, deeply predatory loan using your father's identity as collateral. If this loan defaults, which it will, the lenders will aggressively pursue your father. They will garnish whatever wages he has left. Ethan has actively committed identity theft and fraud against his own father. I stared at the forged signature, the final, irrefutable proof of Ethan's absolute moral bankruptcy. The sorrow I had felt earlier completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating, and devastating resolve. My father wanted a family dinner to discuss Ethan's future. He wanted to demand my money to save his golden child. I closed the manila folder and slid it carefully into my briefcase, right next to the property deed for 428 Elm Street. Thank you, Weston, I said, my voice eerily calm as I picked up my coat. I have everything I need. The spell is going to be broken tonight. I arrived at my father's house precisely at 7 o'clock. The small, familiar structure on Elm Street looked exactly as it had a decade ago, though the paint was peeling slightly around the window frames, and the front lawn desperately needed to be mowed. I parked my sleek, understated sedan behind Ethan's obnoxiously bright, aggressively leased European sports car. I took a deep, steadying breath, gripped the handle of my leather briefcase tightly in my right hand, and walked up the concrete path. Nathan opened the door before I could even knock. He looked exhausted. Deep, shadowed lines bracketed his mouth, and his shoulders carried a permanent, defeated slump. He wore a faded plaid shirt and jeans that looked a size too big for him. Yet despite his obvious physical and financial fatigue, he mustered a stern, authoritative glare as I stepped into the foyer. "Abigail, you're late," he said curtly, completely ignoring the fact that the grandfather clock in the hallway was currently chiming the hour. He didn't offer to take my coat, nor did he offer a hug. He simply turned and walked toward the small dining room. "Come in. Your brother has been waiting. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight." I followed him into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, a relic from my late mother, though the meal itself consisted of a cheap, heavily processed frozen lasagna sitting in the center. Ethan was already seated at the head of the table, a position he had assumed effortlessly. He was wearing yet another poorly tailored suit, his hair slicked back, a look of unbearable smugness radiating from his features. Emma sat closely beside him, swirling a glass of cheap red wine, looking at me with a mixture of challenge and blatant greed. "Sis, so glad you could finally make the time for your own flesh and blood," Ethan declared loudly, gesturing grandly to the empty chair across from him. "Take a seat. Let's break bread and talk about the future of the Vance legacy." I remained standing, my hands resting lightly on top of my briefcase, which I placed deliberately on the edge of the dining table. The silence in the room stretched, growing thick and heavy. "Sit down, Abigail," Nathan commanded, pulling out his own chair. "Ethan has prepared a revised proposal. He is willing to accept $5 million for a silent partnership in his new integration firm. That is half of what he originally asked for. It is an incredibly generous compromise on his part, and I expect you to honor it. You have more than enough capital to spare, and it is time you started acting like a member of this family." "I am not sitting down, Dad," I said quietly, my voice slicing through the heavy atmosphere like a sharpened blade. "And I am not giving Ethan a single dime. Not $5 million, not $5. Ethan slammed his hand flat against the table, the silverware rattling violently against the china. "Are you kidding me? After everything I've offered you? You arrogant selfish." "Quiet," I snapped, the sheer, icy authority in my voice instantly silencing him in his tracks. Even Nathan blinked, startled by the commanding tone I had honed over a decade in boardrooms. I popped the brass latches on my briefcase. The sharp clicks echoed loudly in the small room. "Dad, you asked me here to discuss Ethan's future. You believe he is a visionary on the verge of a breakthrough. You believe he just needs one final push," I said, my gaze locked entirely on my father's tired, lined face. "I am here to show you exactly what Ethan has been doing with his time, his non-existent businesses, and, most importantly, with your money." I pulled the thick stack of copied documents from the folder and tossed the first page onto the center of the table, right next to the cooling lasagna. "This is the bank record for Ethan's Synergy Consulting firm," I stated clearly. "Notice the massive withdrawal from 3 weeks ago, $85,000. It did not go to software development. It went directly to the luxury car dealership across town to pay off the sports car sitting in your driveway right now." Nathan frowned, leaning forward to squint at the paper. "Ethan, what is this? You told me you were leasing that car as a corporate expense." "She's lying, she fabricated that." Ethan sputtered, his face immediately flushing a deep, panicked crimson. He reached out to snatch the paper, but I quickly dropped a second document directly on top of it. "This," I continued, my voice rising slightly in volume, carrying absolute, devastating certainty, "is a detailed record of your personal retirement account, Dad. The one Ethan convinced you to let him manage." Nathan froze. The color began to rapidly drain from his face. "For the past 14 months, Ethan has not invested a single penny of your savings," I revealed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth as I watched my father's world begin to fracture. "Instead, he has systematically initiated bi-weekly wire transfers, siphoning the money out of your retirement fund and directly into an offshore account owned exclusively by Emma. They have been using your life savings to buy designer handbags, expensive dinners, and first-class plane tickets. Your account is entirely empty, Dad. He stole everything you had left." No, that's impossible," Nathan whispered, his hands trembling violently as he picked up the bank statement. He stared at the descending column of numbers, the irrefutable mathematical proof of his son's betrayal. He looked up at Ethan, his eyes wide, pleading for an explanation. "Ethan, Tell me she's making this up. Tell me my money is in the market. Ethan was sweating profusely now. The smugness had completely vanished, replaced by the frantic, cornered look of a trapped animal. Dad, listen to me. The market is complex. It's decentralized. The funds are locked in a liquidity pool. You can't just look at a standard bank statement and understand the blockchain. Stop lying to him. I yelled, the decade of suppressed rage finally breaking through my professional veneer. I pulled the final, most damning document from the briefcase and slammed it down onto the table with a resounding crack. You want to talk about liquidity, Ethan? Explain this. Nathan looked down at the paper. It was the predatory payday loan application. 3 days ago, I explained, my voice shaking slightly with raw, unadulterated disgust. When Ethan realized I might actually refuse his ridiculous shakedown, he went to a high-interest lending agency downtown. He took out a $50,000 cash loan. I pointed directly to the bottom right corner of the page. Look at the signature, Dad. Look at the applicant name. Nathan stared at the document. His breathing became shallow, rapid, and raspy. He traced a trembling, calloused finger over the ink. He saw his own name. He saw his own social security number. And he saw the clumsy, desperate forgery of his own signature. He committed identity theft, Dad, I said softly, the silence in the room now absolute and terrifying. He used your name to secure a loan he never intends to repay. When it defaults next month, the creditors are going to come after you. They will garnish your wages. They will sue you. He was perfectly willing to let you go to prison or die in abject poverty, just so he could maintain his pathetic, fraudulent lifestyle for a few more months. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. Emma was staring at the table, her face completely pale, slowly sliding her chair an inch away from Ethan. Ethan sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing, unable to formulate even a single, pathetic lie to counter the absolute devastation of his own handwriting. Then Nathan moved. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. The denial that had blinded him for 36 years suddenly shattered, falling away to reveal a man who had finally, agonizingly recognized the monster he had created. He slowly stood up from his chair. He walked around the edge of the table, his eyes locked onto his son. "Give me the keys," Nathan said. His voice was a terrifying, hollow whisper, completely devoid of emotion. "Dad, wait please, I can fix this, I have a new investor lining up," Ethan babbled, tears of genuine panic finally spilling down his face as he scrambled backward in his chair. "Give me the keys to my house," Nathan repeated, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a dark, unquestionable authority I had never heard before. "And get out. Do not pack your bags. Do not go upstairs. Get out of my sight. If you are not out of this house in 10 seconds, I am calling the police myself." Ethan looked at his father, searching for the familiar softness, the perpetual forgiveness he had exploited his entire life. He found absolutely nothing but a cold, impenetrable wall of disgust. Trembling, sobbing openly now, Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his house key, and dropped it onto the table. It landed with a pathetic clatter next to the forged loan document. Without looking back, Ethan practically sprinted for the front door, Emma following closely behind him, abandoning him before they even reached the car. The front door slammed shut. The tires of the sports car squealed against the pavement outside and then faded away into the distance. Nathan stood in the dining room for a long time, staring blindly at the empty chair. Then, his legs seemed to give out. He collapsed heavily into his seat, buried his face in his rough, calloused hands, and began to weep. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely legal. The very next morning, I instructed Weston to forward the meticulously compiled dossier of Ethan's financial crimes directly to the district attorney's office. Faced with irrefutable evidence of wire fraud, identity theft, and the exploitation of the elderly, the authorities moved with incredible speed. Within a week, Ethan was formally indicted. Emma, proving there is absolutely no honor among thieves, immediately accepted a plea deal, turning state's evidence against him to avoid jail time. Ethan's sports car was repossessed, his offshore accounts were frozen, and he was left facing a very lengthy, very real prison sentence. He tried to call me from the county holding facility exactly once. I let it go straight to voicemail and then blocked the number. The parasite had been permanently removed. The hardest part, however, was the aftermath with my father. 2 weeks after the catastrophic dinner, I returned to the house on Elm Street. The atmosphere was completely different. The suffocating tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, somber stillness. I found Nathan in the backyard, sitting on a rusted lawn chair, staring blankly at the overgrown grass. He looked older, frailer, the reality of his profound failure as a parent having aged him a decade in 14 days. I pulled up another chair and sat beside him. For a long time, we just listened to the distant hum of traffic. "He's gone," Nathan finally whispered, his voice hoarse, staring straight ahead. "My son is going to prison, and I put him there." I enabled him every single step of the way. I gave him the rope, and I watched him tie the knot. He slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, swimming with a grief and a heavy, crushing guilt that he could no longer hide behind denial. "Abigail," he choked out, his voice breaking violently. "I am so sorry. God, I am so incredibly sorry. I was blind. I was a fool. I missed your wedding. I broke your heart. I let him bleed me dry, and I blamed you for surviving it. I spent my whole life trying to fix a boy who was fundamentally broken, and in the process, I threw away a daughter who was brilliant and strong and kind. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I needed you to know that I see it now. I see everything." The apology I had waited 10 years to hear finally washed over me. It didn't magically erase the pain of walking down the aisle alone. It didn't fix the lost years. But as I looked at the broken, weeping man beside me, I felt the heavy, suffocating knot of resentment in my chest finally begin to loosen. "I accept your apology, Dad," I said softly, reaching out and resting my hand gently on his arm. He flinched slightly at the contact, as if he felt unworthy of the comfort, before leaning into it, weeping openly into his hands. We sat there until the sun began to set, the sky turning a bruised purple and burnt orange. When his tears finally subsided, I opened my purse and pulled out a thick, official-looking document. "Dad, there is one last thing we need to discuss," I said, handing him the paperwork. "Ethan completely destroyed your credit, and your retirement is gone. You cannot keep working double shifts at the hardware store at your age." Nathan wiped his eyes, taking the document with a trembling hand. "I know, Abigail, I know. I'm going to have to talk to the landlord. I'm going to have to move out. I can't afford the rent here anymore. I'll find a small apartment somewhere." "You aren't moving anywhere, Dad," I replied, a small, genuine smile finally touching my lips. "Look at the name of the holding company at the top of the lease." Nathan adjusted his reading glasses, squinting at the fine print. "Vanguard Ascendant Trust. Yes, that's the corporate landlord. What about them?" "I am the sole beneficiary and executor of Vanguard Ascendant Trust, Dad," I explained quietly. "When the bank foreclosed on this house 5 years ago because of Ethan's debt, I bought it in cash. You haven't been paying rent to a faceless corporation. You've been paying it to me. And as of this morning, I have officially transferred the deed entirely into your name. You own this house free and clear. You will never have to worry about a mortgage or rent ever again." Nathan stared at me, his jaw slack, the paperwork trembling violently in his hands. The sheer magnitude of the grace I was extending to him, after the profound betrayal he had inflicted upon me, left him completely speechless. He looked from the deed to my face, tears springing fresh to his eyes. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking with awe and deep shame. "After everything I did, after everything I failed to do, why would you protect me like this?" "Because I am not Ethan," I said firmly, standing up from the lawn chair. "And because I wanted to prove to myself, more than anyone else, that I built an empire without needing to destroy people to do it. You have a safe place to live, Dad. You have security. The rest is up to you." I turned and walked back through the house, out the front door, and to my car. I didn't look back. As I drove away from Elm Street, watching the small house fade in my rearview mirror, I rolled down the window, letting the cool evening air rush over my face. The heavy, dark shadow of my family's dysfunction that had clung to me for over a decade had finally been severed. I had faced the ghosts of my past, I had protected what was mine, and I had won on my own terms. I was free.